What's in a name and how is that tied to your identity? Let's talk about it with Gorilla My Love by Toni Cade Bambara today.
Gorilla My Una.
All right, so we start out in this story with a young girl named Hazel who's in a car with her Hunka Bubba, her baby Jason, a lot of pecans, and granddad. And man, what kind of girl do you get? Obviously, we've seen Hazel before, for those that have read other Toni Cade Bambara. But in this story here, what are the implications of what type of a girl Hazel is?
That's one thing that I was kind of confused about and I want to discuss is because I feel like the Hazel from this Bambara story isn't necessarily the Hazel that we've seen in the other stories, because this one is Spitfire. She is a pistol whip. And she is thunderous. She is powerful. She's in a magnet. I don't know. She has presence, character. You immediately fall in love with her. She's hilarious. I feel like she's one of those people where you walk into your room, you walk in a room and she's who you gravitate towards. She has the it factor. And a lot of the other Hazels in Bambara's stories felt reserved, and this one seems like this Hazel is over the top.
I would say you definitely get kind of like that shocking moment with her, but she also seems smart, right? Like the way that she's reading the maps, which, pre-Google phones and such, it was a lot harder to do with Dad Quest and MapQuest and such. But, she also is spunky. To your point, she's hilarious. And I think she puts out a certain amount of emotion. She lets her emotions drive a lot of her decisions, which, to your point, I don't know if I gathered that from some of the other stories that we've read with her. But at the same time, I mean, I call her Hazel. We know her from other stories. But you don't know it's Hazel until almost the end of this story, right? Like, she has 5 different nicknames, right, in terms of Scout, Muffin, or something like that. And at the same time, the story itself opens up with kind of that question about Hunka Bubba. And you realize that Hunka is just, how she said uncle, but she couldn't, you can't pronounce certain words when you're little. And, he's changing his names or reverting his name. And you realize that it's that situation where, my son called me, Dada when he was little, and then I was Daddy, and then I was Dad, and now I'm just like, bruh. like your name for someone and how you address them changes as you get older.
I think about that, and it's so important in empowering your name. Think about us on this channel. We've never given out our names in, quote, real life. We're Una and Crypto. Those are nicknames, but they're still us, right? Or are they? And I think about when I was a kid, my sister couldn't say my real name, and so she called me Bish. And
that's nowhere close.
Yeah, and that's nowhere close, but that's what it was. And I think about, do nicknames have just as much empowerment or meaning as your real name? And I think they do in some ways, because they connect a memory a lot of times either to a positive or negative moment. And Hazel here is connecting Uncle Bubba, her nickname Scout, Muffin, Peach, all these things to what her memories are. And for most of them, she's telling a very comedic story about, I guess, her adventure, her growing up, her coming to being into a woman, a young person, I don't know. But I think of how much of us are we identified by our names? Because when I was a teacher and you said a student's name wrong, they let you know, because a lot of us identify by our names or our nicknames. It's who we are.
And then you also have those people where well, I can't place the name, but I know your face, right? And don't let that diminish, how much I think or know about you. I know who you are. I think it goes a little bit of both ways, maybe based on the situation. There's who you are, your will, and then there's your representation, in the external, basically, of nature, external from yourself even. So I know there's a lot here to explore with Big Bird or Hazel, depending on what she's being called at the moment. But do you
think it was Bad Bird, but Big Bird.
She is kind of Bad Bird in this story, right? Because
Yeah.
you know, we see the picture of Hunka Bubba, and we get those flashbacks, right? The story
Yeah.
is kind of told like very stream of consciousness, where we jump around. I'm going to call it consciousness-ish. We jump around a lot, right? We jump from one vignette when we were at the movie, and it's hysterical the way that they're like popping the chip bags, kind of irritating the
Oh, yeah.
teachers and such, and then you know the authority figure, the hall monitor, if you will, kind of comes out to try to get them
Burn
to
bum
hush.
or something. Yeah.
But doesn't authority also come up in this story a lot? Right? If you look at the final line, right? Like if we just skip to that real quick, it says, "'Cause he is my blood brother and understands that we must stick together or be forever lost. What with grown-ups playing change up and turning you round every which way so bad. And don't even say sorry." Right? There's something to be said about how authority is presented in this story. The way the teachers expect a certain performance and call you certain things. The way her grandpa called her the nickname of Scout because he expected her to navigate, right? And even just the way that, you know, she's identifies baby Jason. It's not just Jason. It's not just my brother. It's baby Jason. You are smaller than me. There's something about how authority is projected in this story too, and how that can influence the name and how we identify with others.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong assertion of how we identify ourselves and how we identify others. And we see that Hazel has this connection, obviously, with her uncle and her brother, but it's also how she perceives others perceiving her relationship with them and what those names and those relationships mean. And I feel like Hazel is trying to navigate the world that she understands better than she should at such a young age. She realizes that the older generation is looking differently at her because of her age. And she also is realizing, to your point, more than I think just that of the older generations, that they lie to her, right? And that's what older generations sometimes do to younger generations. And I think about that. And that was kind of one of my main takeaways from the story, besides the power of names, is we always seem to be lying to younger generations. And and adults will know what I'm talking about. There are many things that you do, these white lies to your children because you think it'll make their lives better. And maybe it does. It does enrich their lives of all of these times that you tell them these, quote, white lies to allow them to have a better life and be innocent and have something that is not tainted. I think that Hazel has broken past that, and she knows that. And yet the adults are still lying to her. And she's like, come on, man, I know better.
Well,
like,
and this story, to your point, kind of revolves around that deception, right? The time that she was forced to watch, this religious movie. This isn't about gorillas, right? And then also at the end when she's like, I thought you were going to marry me, Hunka Bubba. And she's like, what? I was kidding. Like, I'm going to marry this girl. Like, come on. Like, don't you know, like, innocence playing? There's something to be said about how she is that at that coming of age moment where she realizes that there's a lot of deception in this world. Like all this time you thought that your parents were invincible and perfect. You realize they're not. You realize that there's times that they've shielded you from things, and that there's things that, aren't really what we say, but what we are thinking. And it's your job as a listener, a receiver of information, to pick through that based on context. And that's a big moment in a child's life.
When do you think it is that you have that literal transition into an adult from the figurative idea that you think is an adult as a child? Is it because I don't have children, but I feel like I've experienced that. And for me, I feel like the first time was when I had to face an authoritarian figure as a child, but under the adult constraint rules. I got pulled over for running a red light. I still say it was yellow, but the cop said it was red, and he let me off, and I didn't get in trouble, but I was still, quote, a child in a, quote, adult's world dealing with an authoritarian figure, and that's when I realized that I was no longer a kid. When do you think it was for you? When did you have that epiphany like Hazel does?
Wow, probably like a decade later. I want to say it was in my 20s. Maybe I'm just thinking of a police story because that's the one that you're telling me right now. But it was the same situation where the police officer was like totally bending the truth of what was actually happening. And I was like legitimately scared. There's actually two cops, and they were actually arguing with each other. Like neither one agreed of what the truth was, right? If we could just tell it like it is, like Hazel said. But that was kind of my coming of age moment. Interesting that maybe just because you mentioned a police story, I had to bring up a police story. I don't know what it was.
Well, I don't know. I just feel like this story encapsulates the coming of age and how our names change over time as well as we become adults. And I love that. And I think Bambara does a great job of showing us how we lose our childhood innocence at different times in our lives. And for some people, that will be at 5 or 6. For some people, it'll be a 16 like me. Some people, maybe for you at 26. Maybe some people never. Maybe they have to have grandchildren before they start to realize that they're the adult figure. I don't know.
Well, and it's worth pointing out that I think Bambara does that on purpose because she ties the name reveal kind of to that loss of innocence moment, right? Because she was Miss Muffin, she was Scout, and it's only kind of at the end when she's kind of realizing this that she's finally reveals that she's Hazel. Right. For people who've never read any other Bambara stories and don't know who Hazel is, right? Like this is that light bulb moment for them. And I think she does that on purpose because to your point, it can be very different and very personal for when that realization happens. Let us know in the comments down below what you think was the realization in this story. Did you enjoy this? What other Bambara stories should we cover next? I'm going to leave a playlist to all of the other talks on Hazel and others by Bambara. Thank you for spending time with us today. My name has been Una. Peace.
Crypto out.